Welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. Today we are going to hear about the book Ecology by Mary Daly, and that it's going to be talked about and read from by Kate Graham. So thank you so much, Kate, and welcome everybody here on the webinar. It's a women-only webinar, so if you're here on Zoom and you're male, could you leave and watch it later on YouTube? Welcome everybody, and over to you, Kate.
Thanks very much, Joe. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everybody who's watching. And it's a real privilege and an honour, really, to be able to talk about this book, which, of course, is coming back to front on the screen here. So, Mary Daly. Where to start? I'm going to start with her original comment by her in her original introduction, which I've lost the place for, which is here. Writing this book is participating in feminist process. This is problematic, for it isn't a book by its definition a thing, an objectification of thinking and imagination and imagining and speaking. Here is a book in my hands, fixed, solid. Perhaps, hopefully, its author no longer wholly agrees with it. It is at least partially her past. The dilemma of living and verbing, living verbing writer is real, but much of the problem resides in the way books are perceived. If they are perceived, used, and idolized as sacred texts, like the Bible or the writings of Chairman Mao, then, of course, the idolaters are caught on a wheel that turns but does not move. So I think that sort of introduces the catalytic intention of this book as a vehicle, a means by which women can change. And that is certainly my experience of reading it. I got a hold of a copy after reading a review in Spare Rib, which was a United Kingdom publication back in the 70s and 80s. The review was by Sheila Shulman, who later went on to become a rabbi, actually, but wonderful, wonderful New York lesbian feminist. And she wrote this amazing review. And then at the end, she said, read this book. She said, beg, borrow, or steal it, but read it. And I'm relieved and slightly ashamed to say that I stole my copy because I was unemployed, terminally unemployed at the time, very, very skint. And it was just completely beyond my wit to get the money to buy it. And I read it. And I passed that message on to you, but it's perhaps not as, I don't know if it's not as powerful now as it was then, but it was hugely, hugely significant to me. Okay, I'm going to try and read some bits, and please be kind in the best sense, because it's a very difficult undertaking to introduce people to this book. This book has to do with the mysteries of good and evil. To name it as a feminist ethics might be a clue, but it would also be misleading, pointing only to foreground problems. It would be something like arguing for equal rights in a society whose very existence depends on inequality. That is, upon the possession of female energy by men. The spring into free space, which is women-identified consciousness, involves a veritable mental and behavioral mutation. The phallocratic categorizations of good and evil no longer apply when women honor women, when we become honorable to ourselves. As Barbara Starrett wrote, we are developing something like a new organ of the mind. This development both causes and affects qualitative leaping through galaxies of mind space. It involves a new faculty and process of valuation. None of the dreary ethical texts, from those of Aristotle down to Paul Ramsey and Joseph Fletcher, can speak to the infinitely expanding universe of what Emily Culpeper has named gynergy. Indeed, the texts of phallocratic ethicists function in the same manner as pornography, legitimating the institutions which degrade women's being. Ecological meta-ethics, in contrast to all of this, functions to affirm the deep dynamics of female being. It is gynography. In making this meta-patriarchal leap into our own background, feminists are hearing and naming the immortal Metis, goddess of wisdom, who presided over all knowledge. In patriarchal myth, she was swallowed by Zeus when she was pregnant with Athena. Zeus claimed that Metis counseled him from inside his belly. In any case, the Greeks began ascribing wisdom to this prototype of male cannibalism. We must remember that Metis was originally the parthenogenic mother of Athena. After Athena, she was reborn from the head of Zeus, her single parent. She became Zeus's obedient mouthpiece. She became totally male identified, employing priests, not priestesses, urging men on in battle, siding against women consistently. Radical feminist meta-ethics means moving past this puppet of Papa, discovering the immortal Metis. Lost my place. How amazing is that? Yeah, it also means discovering the parthenogenic daughter, the original Athena, whose loyalty is to her own kind, whose science and wisdom is of womankind. In this discovering, there can be what Catherine Nicholson named the third birth of Athena. As this happens, Athena will shuck off her robothood, will return to her real source, to herself, leaving the demented male mother to play impotently with his malfunctioning machine, his dutiful dim-witted daughter, his broken baby doll gone berserk, his failed fembot. The meta-ethics of radical feminism means simply that while Zeus, Yahweh, and all the other divine male mothers are trying to retrieve their dolls from the ash can of patriarchal creation, women on our own journey are discovering Metis and the third born Athena, our own new being. That is, we are being in the triple goddess who is and is not yet. Yeah. I think this might be a good point to say to those of you that don't know that Mary Daly was a nun, originally a Catholic, who spent many years, as far as I'm aware, studying Catholicism and doing deep dives into Christianity. She wrote two books before she wrote this one. Goodness knows, I can't remember the name of the first one. I had it written somewhere. Oh yeah, here it is. The Church and the Second Sex, I think it was called. And then she got a huge sum of money from the Catholic Church. I love this. To go to have a year I think it was a year sabbatical to go to the Vatican and whatnot and write another book. And the book that she produced is called Beyond God the Father, right? And it was a feminist journey into, you know, the beginnings of radical feminist meta-ethics. And it was taught, it was used in colleges, particularly in the United States, in what was called women's studies in those days. And it was pretty amazing. And And then she talks about, in this introduction here, the new intergalactic introduction, she talks a bit more about the history of what happened and how she was denied a promotion to, I think, full professorship status or whatever, and how they started to shut down their attempt to own us, really, in universities and colleges. And of course, we know where we are on that journey now. Yeah. Okay, there's a lot about language in here. I'm going to talk a bit about, I'm going to quote this stuff that she says about hagiography, okay? Hagiography, she says, is a term employed by Christians and is defined as the biography of saints' lives, biography of an idealizing or idolizing character. Hagiology has a similar meaning. It's a description of sacred writings or sacred persons. Both of these terms are from the Greek hagios, meaning holy. Surviving, moving women can hardly look to the masochistic martyrs of pseudo-spiritual religions as models. Since most patriarchal writing that purports to deal with women is pornography or hagiography, which amount to the same thing, women in a world from which women-identified writing has been eliminated are trying to break away from these moldy models, both of writing and of living. Our four sisters were the great hags, whom the institutionally powerful but privately impotent patriarchs found too threatening for coexistence, and whom historians erase. Hag is from an Old English word meaning harpy, witch. Webster's gives us the first and archaic meaning of hag, quote, a female demon, fury, harpy. It also formerly meant an evil or frightening spirit. We should ask the relevant question, evil by whose definition? Frightening to whom? A third archaic definition of hag is nightmare. Now, the important question is whose nightmare? Hag is also defined as an ugly or evil-looking old woman. Oh, but this, considering the source, may be considered as a compliment. For the beauty of strong, creative women is ugly by misogynistic standards of beauty. And as for old, ageism is a feature of phallic society. Okay, for women who are on the journey of radical being, the lives of witches, of the great hags, of our hidden history, are deeply intertwined with our own process. As we write and live our own story, we are uncovering their history, creating hagography and hagology. Unlike the saints of Christianity, who must by definition be dead, hags live. Women traveling into feminist space and time are creating hagocracy, the place we govern. To govern is to steer and to pilot. We are learning individually and together to pilot the time spaceships of our voyage. The vehicles of our voyage may be any creative enterprises that further women's progress. Let's say that again. The vehicles of our voyage may be any creative enterprises, that further women's process. The point is that they should be governed by the witch within, the hag within. And then she talks about wild eyes and stuff. Brilliant. So a lot of her book is about language, about about inventing, rediscovering language and using it to tell our truth, to tell our story. Now, you know, I hear over the last decade or so, I hear a lot, particularly about what do you call them? Narratives. Oh God, narratives. The this narrative, the that narrative, right? And I'm like, what? As if the experiences that we go through are simply stories or versions. Yeah. And so, you know, within that context of, you know, the feminist narrative or the gender critical narrative or whatever bullshit, that I think that's highly dubious. I think there is reality. But in the context of Mary Daly's writing, it is so important that we tell our story, and the whole notion of myths and the role of myths in a very deep sense to locate, to put a background, right? To bring the background to our lives, to bring the depth to our understanding is absolutely fundamental. And she was the first person to make that really clear to me. So there's a whole section at the start of this book where, as you read it, you begin to, you know, you become, I became attuned, yeah, to her message and her communication. And that was very encouraging and inspiring and inspiraling and, you know, catalytic, as I say. And she makes it quite clear that she's a radical feminist. I mean, you know, she says things like, she talks about fear. Oh God, this bit's really important. Okay. When women become aware of the manipulative ambiguity of the pronoun he, we have perceived only the foreground of grammatical silencing techniques. Just as it would be a mistake to fixate upon the pseudo-generic man and assume that terms such as people and persons are real generics, so it is a mistake to fixate upon the third person singular. And then she talks about Monique Wittig a little bit. The fact is that the female saying I is as alien at every moment to her own speaking and writing. Oh, she is broken by the fact she must enter this language in order to speak or to write. As the I is broken, so is the inner I. The capacity for integrity, knowing, sensing. In this way, the inner voice of the self's integrity is silenced. The external voice babbles in alien and alienating tongues. And when the self tries to speak out of her true depths, the pedantic peddlers of correct usage and style try to drown it in their babble. Oh, and don't we know about their babble? Women are silenced and split by the embedding of fears. These contrived and injected fears function in a manner analogous to the electrodes implanted in the brain of a victim who can be managed by remote control. This is a kind of silent control. Women may feel that they are free from certain fears and then bend to the unacknowledged power of these fears with mental knee-jerk responses. A brief analysis of responses to a few of these instilled fears should unmask the methods of silent control, which silence the voices of women's deep selves. For example, the cliche quote, "She lacks a sense of humor," applied by men to every threatening woman, is one basic electrode embedded just deeply enough into the fearful foreground of women's psyches to be able to conduct female energy against the self while remaining disguised. The comment is urbane, insidious, boring, and predictable, devastating if believed. The problem is the victim who sees through this dirty trick on one level may believe the judgment literally on more vulnerable levels. It's perfectly consistent with patriarchal patterns that this device is used especially against the wittiest women, who are dismissed as sharp-tongued. The godfather is the father of lies and favors the most blatant lies. How apt is this? Listen to this. In the land of the fathers, the more blatant the lie, the greater its credibility. For it is then most consistent with the general pattern of bizarre beliefs. Our ability to overcome the power of such particular fear-installing lies depends upon our ability to discern the pattern of the whole. Gynecology requires a constant effort to see the interconnectedness of things. It involves seeing the totality of the lie, which is patriarchy, unweaving its web of deception. Since the totality of the patriarchal lie is not integrity, since it lacks the complexity of real integrity, it tends to fall apart quickly once we see its pattern, once we dare to face the whole thing. Moreover, since it depends entirely upon the reality which it distorts and demonically reflects, our seeing through the patriarchy is at the same time learning to see the background, our stolen integrity, energy, and being. All right. So she's calling for revolution, and she's calling for revolution in our perception, but in our being. She doesn't even alienate our perception from our being. And being is hyphenated. Our being is our doing. I mean, I've heard women argue about postmodernist theory where the dynamic interchange between perception and doing and being and understanding is analyzed by men who are child rapists like Foucault. We don't need them. We don't need their shit, and we don't need their distorted demonic projections. We have Mary Daly. We have ourselves. So that is the introduction to the book. And believe it or not, that's quite a small part of the book. So like, you know, it's like one of those things, oh my God, if you're, I mean, I suggest that everyone take 6 weeks at the very least to read this. I think it takes time to read this, and it takes a consciousness raising group as well, or several good radical feminist friends who are also reading it. And I think it takes lesbianism to read it, you know, which I'm going to go and say perhaps controversially for some people, for some women. The main section of the book, she calls it the second passage, is called the Sado Ritual Syndrome, the reenactment of goddess murder. It's pretty heavy to go through. She does it in 6 chapters. And oh God, I could tell you what they are, but I don't want to do so in a way that sort of skims over the huge voyage that this is. This is like crossing the Atlantic, maybe even the Pacific Ocean in a small boat. I mean, we have the buoyancy of the ocean and the air, but it's a formidable task. And it's unbelievable to me. I still find it incredulous that she was able to do it. So having said that, she quotes some stuff from the Babylonian Genesis, which I'm not going to read because it's all about the dismembering of the goddess. And I don't want to leave you, wherever you're watching this, with anything like that in your ears. Linda Barafaldi says, and she quotes her saying, "When I realized they had made the goddess into Mary, and that the Annunciation scene was a depiction of the grape of the goddess, I remembered that as a little girl, I had been taught to recite the Angelus 3 times a day. I was horrified to realize that I had been taught to recite the rape of the goddess and to cooperate in the mutilation killing of my own self-image of myself." She does a prelude to the second passage, and then she begins with Indian Sutti, the ultimate consummation of marriage. And, you know, she does quote many women. It's lovely, the way that she includes so many women. She's got a quote from Virginia Woolf, which I highlighted somewhere, but I seem to have lost. And she talks about the reality, she did, you know, it's research of Sutti, which is when women are burned after the death of their husbands. She talks about it being passed off as a custom. The term custom, a casual and neutral term, is often used by scholars to describe these barbarous rituals of female slaughter. Clearly, however, they were religious rites. Some scholars assert that an unscrupulous priesthood provided the religious legitimation for the practice by rigging the text of the Rig Veda. Priests justified the ritual atrocity by their interpretation of the laws of karma. Oh, I can't, you know. This horror show was made possible by the legitimating role of religious rite, which allows the individual to distinguish between the real self, who may be fearful or scrupulous, and the self as a role performer. This schizoid perception on the part of those participating in the ritual carries over to the scholars, who, though temporarily or spatially distanced from the rite, identify with it rather than the victims. And she talks about that. Then she goes, what about before his death? What about before his death? Age 9, day after marriage, left femur dislocated, pelvis crushed out of shape. Age 7, living with husband, died in great agony after 3 days. Aged about 10, crawled to hospital on her hands and knees, has never been able to stand erect since her marriage. The case was of a well-to-do, educated, city-dwelling family. So she tells us exactly what the situation is. And then she describes patterns of the sado-ritual syndrome, which are evident in this case. First, an obsession with purity. The obsession legitimates the fact that the women who are the primary victims are erased physically as well as spiritually. The primary victims are often killed. In other cases, such as Chinese foot binding, they are physically and psychically maimed. The original erasure obviously keeps the primary victims from being witnesses In the name of purity, they are effectively silenced. Thus, the widow's sexual purity is safeguarded by ritual murder. She's got 7 different aspects of the pattern. That was the first. Second, there's total erasure of responsibility for the atrocities performed through such rituals. So the fact is that it is ritual, right? It's a pseudo ritual syndrome. Third, genocidal ritual practices have an inherent tendency to catch on and spread. Oh, we've noticed that, haven't we? Fourth, women are used as scapegoats and token torturers. The setting up of mothers-in-law in this case, masking the male-centeredness of the ritualized atrocity and women turning against each other. Then fifth, we find compulsive orderliness, obsessive repetitiveness, and fixation upon minute details which divert attention from the horror. Sixth, behavior, which at other times and places is unacceptable, becomes acceptable and even normative as a consequence of conditioning through the ritual atrocity. And seventh, there's more about this, but there is the legitimation of the ritual by the rituals of objective scholarship. So the reflection and the echoing of that whole shit. Okay, that was the first one. You can see why I said you need 6 weeks. I think you need 3 months actually, but some of you might be able to deal with this quicker than I could. Next chapter is about Chinese foot binding. And Sheila, I'm sure, has much to echo on this because, of course, we have high heels, which are ubiquitous. There's a whole chapter on Chinese foot binding. Sorry, I was hoping to be able to read bits of this, but you know, I'm shaking. Dealing with the rage, which is what she awakens within us, is takes a certain amount of skill, and it's quite important. And I'm about to go off after this. I won't be able to stay for the breakout rooms, but because I'm off to Hyde Park to the Reformers Tree, and so I really have to kind of nurse and contain, in some senses, the fury. I think it might be a good point to say that reading Mary Daly, for me, is fundamentally different to reading Andrea Dworkin. When I read Andrea Dworkin, and I haven't read all her stuff, I can't get through some of her stuff. I can't cope with it, right? I just felt so disempowered. I felt so vulnerable. I felt so sad. I felt so demoralized and broken and drained and horrified and all of those things, and lost and abandoned and frightened, so frightened, and deeply, deeply scarred. When I read Mary Daly, I felt enraged, right? Furious, right? Empowered, right? Determined, committed for my whole life, emboldened, right? Yeah. I felt damn right. I felt furiously female, furiously feminist, furious forever. I felt loved. I felt held. Yeah. And yet they're talking about the same patriarchy. They're talking about the same power. They're talking about the same shit. Okay. So yeah, chapter 5, which is the third journey, which was about African. She calls it African genital mutilation. And as a good friend of mine was telling me yesterday, of course, it goes on across the world, and we see it here now. And it always has happened, just as the damaging of women's feet has happened, excuse me, and the burning of women has happened in Europe, as we know. She quotes Audre Lorde. And Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Pat Parker, who I love. And then she talks to us about African genital mutilation, the details of it, the engagement of the United Nations and UNICEF, and the YWCA, in the pseudo-ritual syndrome. She talks about the pseudo-ritual syndrome again in the context of this. She talks about the clitoris and in terms of its purity or impurity, because it does not serve male purposes and it has no function in reproduction. Hatred, as Benoit Gros points out, hatred of the clitoris is almost universal, for this organ is strictly female for women's pleasure. Thus it is by nature impure. And the logical conclusion acted out by tribes that practice excision and infibulation is purification of women by its removal. It's believed that this encourages fidelity. 2, the second component of the syndrome, erasure of male responsibility. Yeah. We see this with the focus on Susie Green, I think, at the minute, don't we? It's so easy for us to focus on women, I think, rather than the true agents of these atrocities. So she talks about this and draws the connections between Indian city, Chinese foot binding, and African genital mutilation. And she does not pull her punches. It is very, very clear what's going on. And then she says things mixed in with this: the extent to which female token torturers have been used to mask the male masterminds of female genital mutilation is suggested in an account given by Montagu of female infibulation as practiced amongst tribes immediately south of the first cataract of the Nile. Part of the procedure involves a visit to the bridegroom before the marriage by one of the women who performs the infibulation. The purpose is to obtain the exact measurements of his member. And then she makes a wood or a clay copy and then sews her up to size. She talks about the years, the age of the girls that this is done to. Yeah. I knew I was kind of dreading doing this. I didn't remember why. And it is, of course, because it is so appalling, horrific, and real. Chapter 6, European witch burnings. Purifying the body of Christ, she calls it. And she's on a quote here by Judy Grant, "A woman is talking to death." I'm gonna read it because despite her more recent nonsense, I think this old stuff is fabulous. "They don't have to lynch the women very often anymore. No, they used to. The Lord and his men went through the villages at night, beating and killing every woman caught outdoors. The European witch trials took away the independent people. 2 different villages, after the trials were through that year, had left in them each 1 living woman. 1. And then she's got a Robin Morgan quote. Oh, yeah. Anyway, so it's not easy. It's difficult to read. And the consciousness of our oppression is difficult. It's not an easy path to come to. Many of the socialist feminists in particular, I think, have not done this work. They haven't realized the depths, the fundamental nature, the enormity of our oppression as women by men. They haven't. They seem to think that it's simply a byproduct, some of them, of capitalism, or that it's exploitation, or that by rearranging some of the structures of society so as to properly take account of reproductive rights and needs, we can attain, a new garden of peace and happiness. And I wish that were true. I wish that were true. I so wish that were true. When you read Mary Daly, when I read Mary Daly, and when I was introduced through her careful guardianship to the totality, the enormity, and the depth of our situation, I realized that we are emerging just as many other female animals do into the recognition of our oppressed condition. I live on a narrow boat. That's my door. And I've seen the ducks be raped by, I've seen a duck be raped by drakes. About 6 of them took turns, waited for each other, and then mounted her. And they got a bit carried away, and one of them raped another drake as well. And what they do is they try and drown the bird. They get on the back and they force its head down under the water until it capitulates. And women, adult, human, female. Yeah. I wanted to say this, and this is again, along with the thing I said about Andrea Dworkin, perhaps really controversial. There's that quote by Simone de Beauvoir about, women are made, not born, essentially. There's this understanding that women are socialized, and an implicit thing that men are socialized into patriarchal male supremacy. Well, I defy you to read Mary Daly and continue to think that. This thing is deeper. It's more primordial than any of us have theorized, apart from her. And this is the beginning. As far as I'm aware, this is at least a touch paper. I have a fire of a Rayburn here that I keep lit in the winter, and every morning, and I did it just before I arrived here, I have to rekindle it. And there's a slight possibility it might not catch a light. I can't just put coal on it. I need to, or solid fuel, they call it. I need to, touch it and air it and, blow air into it sometimes and really get it going. And this is what she did. We know we are, as far as we know, the second wave. I know we're a recurring wave. I mean, you know, Sappho said that thing that, you know, when years to come, they will know that we were here, right? And I know that she was there. I know that they were there, right? And we've always been here. Because we're women, right? Now, around the time that this book was written, there was another little pamphlet that was out prior to this, actually, and it was called the Scum Manifesto. And I used to like reading it out loud on the bus. The men used to freak out. It's a fabulous, you know, exercise, a bit like going to bed stores with your partner and trying out the beds. That was also good fun. And but a lot of people really like it. The thing about that Scum Manifesto is that it's very superficial. It's very woman hating. She was explicitly not a feminist. She was drug addicted, disturbed, deranged, I would suggest. She hated men, and she had a perception of the situation we are in. But this woman is a guide. This woman is she's not only a mountain guide. It's like, I go back to the thing of crossing the ocean. I mean, what a gift to us. So, never mind, Juliana, you can pick up the breakout room later. I'm going to try and move on, because I can't do this justice, and I don't want to bore you all with my musings. American gynecology, and you sort of read this and you think, what is she going to, you know, she's doing these continents. You think to yourself, oh, this is continental. You begin to kind of catch on. And then she goes on about gynecology, genocide by the holy ghosts of medicine and therapy. She does this wonderful quote from Charlotte Perkins Gilman. John, my husband, is a physician, and perhaps, although I would not say it to a living soul, perhaps this is one reason I do not get well faster. Here comes John. I must put this away. He hates to have me write a word. You know? Thanks, Murray. So here we go. Oh, God. I'm sorry. Oh, great goddess. Yeah, that's better. As we shall see, the pattern has not changed. All right. She documents it. She introduces us to it. She redefines it clearly without the obscurations and obfuscations of the fetishized, phallocentric farts. And she discusses it again in relation to the sado-ritual syndrome. All the steps 1 to 7. I encourage you to have the courage to read it. I really, really do. Okay. Gynecology, glory, glory. Gynecology. And we're seeing yet another enactment of this in our time, aren't we? Purification by the mind, gynecologists. Oh yes, the monoculture of the mind. Okay. I've folded it down here to read something here. Holy ghosts. Since many women confide to their gynecologists and therapists private matters, which they do not share with any women, the team of Holy Ghosts keeps women from sharing secrets with each other, and thus purifies society of female bonding. The team thus constitutes a modern secular church, blocking the way to feminist movement and communication. While the body doctors offer their faithful the pill as daily Holy Communion, the mind doctors offer weekly confession. How fucking brilliant is that? Right? I'm running out of time. Big chunk about American gynecology. And then she talks about Nazi medicine and American gynecology, a torture cross-cultural comparison, just in case you didn't get the picture earlier on. And it's really, really difficult to read, but also worth it. Yeah, and hugely worth it because she finishes the book by talking about sparking, spinning, and spooking. That's it. Yeah. And this is amazing. Sparking is making possible female friendship, which is totally other from male comradeship. Hence, the spinster will examine male comradeship fraternity in order to avoid the trap of confusing sisterhood with brotherhood, of thinking, even in some small dusty corner of the mind, of sisterhood as simply a gender correlative of brotherhood. She will come to see that the term bonding, as it applies to harps and hags and harpies and furies and crones, is as thoroughly other from male bonding as hags are the other in relation to patriarchy. Male comradeship and bonding depends on energy drained from women, its secret glue. Since women are generators of energy. See, there's a connection there with what that woman did in Scum Manifesto. We know that we generate the energy. The bonding of hags in friendship for women is not draining, but rather energizing, gynerizing. It's the opposite of brotherhood, not essentially because the self-centering women oppose and fight patriarchy, but because we are and act for ourselves. The term comrade is derived from a Middle French word meaning a group of soldiers sleeping in one room, or roommate. The concept of room here is spatial, suggesting links resulting from physical proximity, not necessarily from choice. The space is physical, not psychic. And it's definitely not a room of one's own. To the degree that it has been chosen, the choice is made by another. The comrades do not choose each other for any inherent qualities of mind or spirit. Although this accidental and spatial roommate aspect does apply to all women, insofar as all women are oppressed and possessed, it does not apply to the deep and conscious bonding of hags in the process of being. Since the core soul spark of such deep bonding is friendship, it does not essentially depend upon an enemy for its existence or becoming. See, she is not saying that women are made. She is saying that women are. There's so much in this end bit, so much. Spooking from the locker room. She's got a quote here from Virginia Woolf, Moments of Being. I'm going to read it. I hazard the explanation that a shock is at once, in my case, followed by the desire to explain it. I feel that I have had a blow, but it is not, as I thought as a child, simply a blow from an enemy hidden behind the cotton wool of daily life. It is, or will become, a revelation of some order. It is a token of some real thing behind appearances. And I make it real by putting it into words. It is only by putting it into words that I make it whole. This wholeness means that it's lost its power to hurt me. It gives me, perhaps because by doing so I take away the pain, a great delight to put the severed parts together. Virginia Woolf, that's in A Sketch of the Past, Moments of Being. And, you know, here immediately afterwards, Mary Daly speaks of the voyage. So perhaps voyage is a good metaphor. in the course of this voyage, so on and so forth. I will ask you to read it. Read it, sisters and friends. Read it. Allow it to suffuse and marinate your being, your consciousness, and challenge you in the best sense. I saw her in Edinburgh when she came as a book tour for, I think it was Pure Fury, and she challenged us in that room to begin to become ourselves, to do ourselves. And a woman at the back kind of complained at her and said, "It's all very well you saying that," she said, "but I have children, I have a council tenancy, I have, you know, I can't do that." And I was caught for a moment in doubt. I remember the horrible feeling of maybe it's not true. Maybe this journey that she invokes us to begin is not real. But she was strong. She stood up and she didn't have any of it. She said, "Yes, you can." She said it is the most elemental, the most powerful, the most important thing to do. And I'm so glad that she did. And I hope that, you know, you feel that I've done her justice here, because I feel the enormity of the responsibility very strongly. Thank you. I'm going to leave it at that.
Right. So I've just come on with you, Kate, to say thank you so much on behalf of everybody in this webinar, and hopefully anybody who's watching it on YouTube later, this has really spoken to you as well. It's if you only read one feminist book, in my mind, this would be the one to read. It's completely changed my life, and in that positive way. So I there are lots of comments from lots of women who've read it or enjoy what you've said, Kate, but many women say it's sort of life-changing in a positive way rather than despair. This is actually the guide to get us over the mountain.
Yeah.
And for me, it's got the most hope of any of our literature, as well as a devastatingly accurate analysis, which is sad. But thank you so much on behalf of everybody in the webinar and the women and who are going to be watching this in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jo.
Okay, great. We'll see everybody at future webinars. Bye.
Bye.